Okay, my name is Valur Ingimundarson, and I'm a professor of contemporary history at the University of Iceland. And I'm going to talk here about the Arctic Circle Assembly, which was initiated by former Icelandic president Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, which is held annually in Reykjavík, has become the biggest annual conference venue on the Arctic. It's a personal legacy and nation branding project with the aim of drawing attention to Iceland's location in the north. And in this talk, I will talk about the rationale behind it, its development and reception. And it has been given much outside political attention from the start. And it was a testament to Grímsson's success in framing the project, embellished governance ambitions, and using his presidential position to promote it before he left the office, and in portraying himself as a sort of a global Arctic ambassador and salesman. But as I stress, external geopolitical interpretations of the project have sometimes been exaggerated or wrong, and as a nation branding project, it has created confusion about Iceland's Arctic policies. Iceland's prioritization of the Arctic and its foreign policy is a recent phenomenon. What prompted it were two seminal events: the US military withdrawal from Iceland. Actually, they are back more or less since 2016, but at that time it was a major break, relegating temporarily into history one of the Cold War's main theaters in the north. And the second reason was the collapse of the Icelandic banking system during the 2008 financial crisis. The Arctic turn reflected a discursive strategy to compensate geopolitically and economically for the loss of Iceland's military importance in a post-Cold War setting, and to offer a vision based on the Arctic's future potential, economic particularly, following the national trauma caused by the financial crash. The 2013 launching of the Arctic Circle Assembly conference by Grímsson at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. fitted into Iceland's efforts to promote an Arctic political agenda driven by status-seeking in search for social recognition abroad, to cement a material success story after the 2008 financial shock. Even if it was not a government-sponsored project, the Arctic Circle quickly became part of Iceland's nation branding. The conference takes place at the Harpa Conference Hall, which is situated by Reykjavík's harbor, which has a loaded symbolic meaning of its own. It is inextricably tied to the ill-fated banking expansion of the mid-2000s, when a leading Icelandic businessman, who later became bankrupt, spearheaded the construction project. Having started at the beginning of 2007, the work on Harpa was immediately halted after the 2008 financial collapse. For many, it became a testimony to the follies and excesses of that period, with suggestions made that it should be kept permanently in its half-finished state in commemoration of a dark chapter in Iceland's history. After it was decided to finish the building, Harpa assumed yet another function following its inauguration in 2011 as a source of national pride, a modern monument of Iceland's expedite and successful reconstruction efforts. Thus, it became the perfect site and vehicle for a status-seeking project such as the Arctic Circle Assembly. Grímsson claimed that he wanted to strengthen the policy-making process in the Arctic by bringing a wide range of stakeholders under one large tent, as he put it. What he had in mind was an annual conference representing social as well as geographic inclusivity, with the participation of government representatives, political leaders, business people, scientists, activists, indigenous peoples from the Arctic countries, as well as non-Arctic ones from Asia, Europe, and other parts of the world. The Arctic Circle Assembly was a project that he and his collaborators, such as US publishing executive Alice Rogoff, had been working on for some time prior to announcing it. And Grímsson argued that the profound, as he put it, new significance of the Arctic in global terms had required a new platform on the scale of the World Economic Forum in Davos, with political leaders attending, or a medieval square where anyone could come knowing that they meet everybody and everybody there. The project also had has a secretariat, and to add luster to it, the word assembly was affixed to its name. What this suggested was that it had something to do with an international institution, which was not the case. In addition, the reference to Davos as a symbolic site for the rich and powerful fitted uneasily with the inclusive rhetoric used to promote the undertaking, or with the elevation of democratic and bottom-up approaches. But Grímsson has sought to mediate these paradoxical impulses at the annual Arctic Circle conferences by mixing elite panel sessions, where he is often the master of ceremony, with open academic ones, without external interference, where scholars and researchers from universities and research institutes have presented their findings. The Arctic Circle assembly immediately prompted conspiratorial speculations and suspicions abroad. It was claimed that it was meant to assume a specific political role outside the formal cooperation of the Arctic states, or the Arctic 8, especially those applying for admission to the Arctic Councils as observers. It was projected as representing a challenge to the Arctic Council because of its governance aspirations and its open door policy vis-à-vis non-Arctic states. At the National Press Club, when he announced the establishment of this project, Grímsson had in fact praised the Arctic Council as an extraordinarily successful instrument for Arctic cooperation. Still, since it was controlled by the Arctic 8 states, he suggested that it lacked inclusiveness and that decisions had to be made on how it should move forward. More specifically, he offered the Arctic Circle Assembly as a platform for those who were not allowed to speak at the Arctic Council, such as the observers. The Norwegian government was not happy with the launching of the Arctic Circle Assembly, seeing it as a competitor to the Arctic Frontiers Conference in Tromsø, which has been held annually since 2007, and which has also attracted politicians, business people, academics, and representatives from local Arctic communities. The Arctic Circle initiative also flew in the face of Norway's idea behind the Arctic Frontiers, which was about protecting the Arctic governing structures led by the Arctic 8. As Norway's Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide put it, "We are happy that more people want to join our club," that is the Arctic Council as observers, because this means they are not starting another club. And that gives some influence on what topics are discussed in relations to the Arctic. Moreover, Jonas Gahr Støre, an opposition leader, a Labour leader, and the current Prime Minister of Norway, stated on the occasion of the 10-year anniversary of Norway's High North strategy that he feared that Norway could lose its initiative on the Arctic, referring specifically to the presence of French President François Hollande, that was in 2015, at the Arctic Circle Assembly. In contrast to its Norwegian counterpart, which plays an instrumental role in formulating the program of the Arctic Frontiers and in inviting high-level participants, the Icelandic Foreign Ministry assumed no such function with respect to the Arctic Circle conferences, where Grímsson is in the leading role. His inclusive description of the Arctic Circle Assembly prompted some Arctic scholars to compare the gathering to a bazaar, where the exchange of global and marginalized knowledge, ideas, and interests could influence Arctic governance. What they termed bazaar governance was about market power exercised through informal dealings, networks, and hierarchies. They did not argue that the Arctic Circle was competing with the Arctic Council for the right to govern Arctic affairs. Still, in a rather alarmist fashion, this is from the Arctic Council, they interpreted the timing of Grímsson's initiative as a provocation to the Arctic Council before a ministerial meeting where decision was made on the application by Asian states, China, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and India, and the EU Commission for an observer status. They also suggested that the Arctic Circles could reposition Iceland geopolitically as a gateway for such non-conformist global Arctic perspectives. The establishment of the Arctic Council, Arctic Circle Assembly had nothing to do with the applications of non-Arctic states or the EU, or with pressuring the Arctic Council. Grímsson had revived an old idea stemming from the Reagan-Gorbachev summit in Reykjavik in 1986, in the waning years of the Cold War, of highlighting Iceland's geostrategic location for branding purposes. But he was not acting on behalf of the Icelandic government or promoting its Arctic policies. He rationalized the selection of Iceland as the host of the Arctic Circle Conference by saying that after being ignored by much of the world, it had been put on the global map due to global warming. Such exceptionalist rhetoric made little sense, given that other places were far more affected by climate change. But some scholars theorized that there was a Chinese connection here, that Grímsson's project launch had coincided with the signing of the free trade agreement between Iceland and China, and that it was linked to the teaming up of an Icelandic firm with a Chinese company in the Arctic for oil exploration. Further, it was argued that the involvement of Alaskan and Greenlandic partners in the Arctic Circle Conference betrayed a sub-state political agenda with autonomous Arctic voices that did not necessarily echo those of the US or the Danish governments. Another commentator went much further, seeing the Arctic Circle, I quote, as a geopolitical interest of Grímsson's in connecting subnational governments and non-Arctic states to the Arctic in a way that at some point has the potential to displace the Arctic Council and national Arctic sovereignty. Yet another one, yet another one made the outlandish point that the Arctic Circle, with a logo of having 6 people holding hands, was a reaction to the exclusion of Iceland from the venue of the Arctic 5 Arctic coastal states, making claim in the Arctic, Central Arctic Ocean. Thus, Grímsson initiative was portrayed as a major geopolitical intervention aimed at making a direct stakeholding claim in Arctic governments by promoting the interests of non-Arctic states, at catapulting Iceland to a central global role in Arctic affairs, as well as highlighting its interests in the region through its blossoming relationship with China, and a furthering of a para-state agenda by creating a network of the marginalized, with transcended sovereign interests of states in a potentially destructive way. Such all-embracing and highly loaded political interpretation certainly gave the initiative the weight and mystic aura its founder sought in the first place. In terms of status-seeking, Arctic Circle became a major brand name, which the Icelandic government exploited, but whose role has always been that of a second fiddle. Most of these accounts were highly speculative, overblown, or plainly wrong. There was no validity to suggestions that state interests, such as those of China and Russia, were behind the Arctic Circle or among its financial sponsors, or that a link existed between it and Iceland's Arctic policy, such as its claim, which is now abandoned, to be seen as an Arctic coastal state. While Grímsson praised China's Arctic policy as being constructive, the launch of the Arctic Circle conference was totally unrelated to Iceland's signing of the trade deal with China, or the conclusion of an agreement with a Chinese company for oil exploration, or other Arctic policy declarations or actions. When embarking on the initiative, Grímsson insisted on viewing the Arctic in global terms, rather than regional ones, where the Arctic states were in charge. There was a need, he claimed, for involving non-Arctic states, including China, India, Nepal, and Pakistan, that were influenced by changes in the Arctic, such as melting of the sea ice and the Greenland glaciers, as well as in Antarctica, and in the region identified with the third pole, the Himalayas, the ice-covered parts of Asia. Thus, the Arctic Circle Assembly was projected as a venue where the representatives of the Arctic Council observer states, as well as states with no such status, could, as I pointed out, meet on an equal basis. And also where regional sub-state interests and perspectives, such as those of Greenland, Alaska, and Scotland, could be addressed. An argument could certainly be made for transcending a self-serving hegemonial regional framework established by the Arctic 8, on the grounds that the effects of climate change did not respect sovereign spaces. Yet such a catch-all approach could also reproduce uncritical tendencies in climate change narratives not to assign specific responsibility or single out culprits for global warming. Iceland's official Arctic policy has from the start been far more restrictive than Grímsson's vision, with its emphasis on the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and Arctic Council, run by the Arctic 8, as cornerstones of Arctic governance. It was not consistent with Grímsson's argument that the Arctic Circle Assembly was within the framework of Arctic governance, or proof of a reasonable alternative model to somewhat broken intergovernmental model, as he put it. Grímsson's philosophy reflected the idealization of Arctic exceptionalism, where geopolitical divisions rooted in an East-West dichotomy had been relegated to a Cold War past. He had been highly critical of the initial refusal of Western states to come to Iceland's rescue when its banking system collapsed, and he had also backed efforts to expand Iceland's ties with China following the financial crisis. In addition, he had publicly opposed Iceland's membership in the European Union, even after the Icelandic government started negotiations with it on joining the organization in 2009, which was later put on hold. Hence, his political views sometimes clashed with government policies, which could lead to confusion and misunderstanding abroad. With the Icelandic president having no formal constitutional policy-making role, if a bully, a pulpit one, the office holder can in fact only exert institutional power in limited circumstances. Consistent with his Arctic cooperative philosophy, Grímsson refrained from voicing criticism of Russia's foreign and Arctic policies. He made the point that the Arctic Council was the only post-Cold War forum for a great power dialogue, and it was important that the Arctic would not be divided up. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, he did not blame Russia. Instead, he seemed to shift the blame on Western policy since the end of the Cold War, which he claimed had not succeeded in guaranteeing stability or peace in Europe. Yet, while stressing that there would be no winner in the war, he also sympathized with the flight of Ukrainians and of the millions of refugees, lamenting the destruction of Ukraine's infrastructure. His ambiguous comments, however, met with social media criticism in Iceland on the grounds that he was aligning with the aggressor, a charge that he denied. Despite its pro-Ukrainian, despite its very strong pro-Ukrainian stance, the Icelandic political elite remained silent on the former president's intervention. Foreign Minister Þórdís Kolbrún Reykfjörð Gylfadóttir used, however, the opportunity at the Arctic Circle Assembly to criticize Russia in vocal terms, so using his venue to do it. Beate Steinweg has argued that the Arctic Circle Assembly represents a new soft law dimension of Arctic governance, and that it's part of a regime complex operating in the intersection between sovereign states and formalized cooperative arrangements. Grímsson has echoed such a view by contending that the Arctic Circle Conference has added three components to the Arctic governance structure: by offering governments an international platform to present their views in politics, by giving subnational and regional entities a chance to advance their interests and perspectives independently of their central governments, and by bringing attention to Arctic dialogues and cooperation outside the region, which has contributed to making non-Arctic states and entities constructive partners. As a global brand, the Arctic Circle Assembly in Reykjavik and its spin-off forums in other cities have certainly become visible meeting places for government delegations, business interests, NGOs, indigenous peoples, and academia. But as a high-profile venue for information sharing and networking, it should not be conflated with Arctic governance. And the periodic global attention on the Arctic has not focused on states-managed state promotions at the Arctic Circle Conference, but on concrete policy announcement or actions, such as the Ilulissat Declaration on Arctic Cooperation or the Russian flag planting exercise in 2007 on the North Pole, and territorial claims based on UNCLOS. So, to sum up, one of the things that have disadvantageously affected this forum is that it has created the false impression that Grímsson was responsible for Iceland's Arctic policies and its main enforcer, What partly explains is that no attempt was made to resolve or negotiate the contradiction between Grímsson's inclusive vision of the global Arctic and the Icelandic government's more exclusive regional one. Thus, one can detect tensions in Iceland's Arctic status-seeking efforts, where the public and private mix, where the embellished small state ambitions override a coherent policy presentation. And the philosophy of the Arctic Circle Assembly is not based on Iceland's foreign and Arctic policies or dictated by the interests of other states, but it reflects an agenda projected and articulated, as I have said here, by its founder. It is at bottom, a personal legacy project which has morphed into nation branding, targeting international audiences, where Grímsson reigns supreme under the approving eyes or gaze of Icelandic domestic elites. Thank you.